I think that Steve Biko has left South Africa a tremendously rich legacy. Many people tend to think of Steve Biko only in the political context, and certainly he was a great activist there and paid the ultimate price for the liberation of South Africa. So I think that would be the first realm, really helping people to get involved in politics, to really change the game and the way in which people did things. I think, though, the other areas in which Steve Biko left a tremendous legacy were really in the areas of the arts. We saw things like in the Medupe Writers Association, people like Duman Ndlovu, who, works on Muvango, come out of there. You saw writers like Njabulo Ndebele. You see people of this generation like Simpiwe Dana. And the list really goes on and on and on. So I think in terms of the arts, Steve Biko and the Black Consciousness Movement also had a really tremendous impact. But I think the root, really, of Steve Biko's legacy is this notion of consciousness, this notion of self-definition. Prior to Biko's work and that of his colleagues in the movement, people in South Africa were calling themselves non-white, as if they were a non-entity. But through this movement, through the process of conscientization, we came to be known as Black. And Black, not just in terms of pigmentation, but Black in terms of mental attitude, the way in which people viewed the world, but also their definition of Black being people who are politically oppressed by the regime. So I would say, in terms of self-definition, politics, the arts, I think also just in terms of community activism, getting out there and doing something. I think that, throughout the world, we have many people that will complain about many things. But it's very few people who actually get out there and try to do something about what they don't like. And I think Steve Biko left a strong legacy of activism. So whether it was when, in the Eastern Cape, they realized how poor medical care was for Black communities and rural Black communities, they established Zanumpilo Clinic, or the feeding schemes that they established, or the bursary programs for children of political prisoners. So a real legacy of rolling up your sleeves and putting ideas into action. I think that those are some of the things that are Steve Biko gifted to South Africa and really to the international community.
Do you think as the country we are honoring the legacy of activism?
Look, I don't think we should make the mistake of saying nothing is happening, because certainly there are people throughout South Africa who are trying to make a difference on a daily basis in their own lives and the lives of their community. Certainly think there is more space for more people to be involved. And even if something doesn't directly impact them, the question is, what can we as individuals and collectively do to improve different situations? So, for instance, I'm sure we've all been at brunch somewhere or some dinner party and someone comments, for instance, on the state of education, right?
Yes.
Well, how many people have actually volunteered for a school reading program? So I think those are the types of things that we really need to see more of. I think that we also need more of us to critically interrogate what's happening in society, and not just to sort of take the surface level 30-minute, 30-second soundbite, or for our generation, our 140 Twitter characters, but really to interrogate issues, to think about them, and to say systemically, how do we make a difference? How do we bring about the change that we say we want to see?
Mr. Biko, he is still an icon of Black consciousness and African intellectualism, as you mentioned. How do you think his legacy of that has encouraged the culture of learning amongst the youth, amongst South Africans, the international world as a whole?
I think that, the beautiful thing about Steve Biko, and one of the things that amazes me on a daily basis about his legacy, is that he was only 30 when he died. Yet in that time, as you say, he really did reach out. He studied. And, he studied in a day and age when you couldn't just Google whatever you wanted to know. He studied in a day and age where you literally had to smuggle banned material into the country. I mean, he read people like Odinga from Kenya, Kaunda from Zambia, Nkrumah, Fanon, Marcus Garvey, and the list goes on and on. I think that he gave us a great example of how you can take information from different places in the world and really understand in some ways your own situation, and not just regurgitate that information, but create your own platform, in his case, Black consciousness. I think that's a tradition that still goes on today. Many of our leading public intellectuals, leaders, activists are actually, they were were actually groomed. They were steeped in the Black consciousness movement. And so you certainly have that culture of inquiry. But I do think, again, there's more that can be done. I think that people do often like to sort of take the easier, simpler route and just give the soundbite as opposed to really going and studying and learning and finding out for themselves. But I think, in my position at the foundation, I'm the Director of International Partnerships. I'm privileged to get to interact with other groups around the world who are utilizing Steve Biko's legacy to advance development, to advance democracy, as well as economic justice. So, for instance, in Brazil, there's a group called the Steve Biko Housing Association.
Okay.
It's been around for about 25 years now, and they work to get young Black Brazilians into university and to assist them in primary as well as secondary school. So there, in action, you have a great example of a group who's using Steve Biko's legacy all the way across the ocean on another continent to bring about change. I was recently in Jamaica for the 126th birthday celebration of Marcus Garvey. And again, you have a group there at Liberty Hall who's using notions of empowerment, Pan-Africanism consciousness to really change the course of life for many young people in Kingston as well as other cities. In Liverpool, in the UK, there's the Steve Biko Housing Association that's been around for about 20 years as well. Utilizes Steve Biko's legacy to create affordable housing for communities. And what I love about all of these groups and the different areas in which they work, it's not just about who was Steve Biko in 1977, what did he mean then. It's really about what does Steve Biko teach us today and how do we apply his legacy and ideas of Black consciousness in the 21st century. I also think the thing that's important is that although Black consciousness was very much a homegrown South African identity, South African idea meant to speak to the oppressed Black masses, it also resonates across other communities. I think we don't give enough credit to the Black consciousness movement and Steve Biko for the work they did to conscientize white South Africans.
Yes.
The question was, if being Black means that we're inferior, does being white mean that you're superior, and how do we come together? So even when SASO walked out of NUSIS, when they left NUSIS, to form SASO, it really forced even white South Africans to have to reckon with what does this mean to be white in this country. And I think that's a dialogue that we see increasingly happening all over the world, where people are trying to figure out who they are and how they relate to people across different racial, cultural, as well as ethnic and religious lines.